you, Mr President, and I rise to speak in favour of the Electoral Control of Corflutes Amendment Bill of 2023. The Greens have long advocated for a ban on corflutes on public spaces, and we've done so for a range of reasons. We recognise, as the honourable member has identified, that corflutes are single-use plastics, and indeed, as my colleague, the Honourable Tammy Franks, remarked the other day, this parliament has banned the use of single-use plastics, except, of course, when it features the images of politicians. And I think that is a point of rank hypocrisy that rankles members of the community as they go about their daily business and face the visual pollution that comes from these corflutes, as well as the impact that it has on the environment in terms of them ending up in landfill. Not the case with a candidate like myself, who's run for office many times and dusts off corflutes over and over. I'm all for recycling, but there are candidates that change their corflutes every time, and that's not a good thing in terms of the environmental impact. I think it's worth looking at the history of this reform. I think it's true to say that this parliament has dealt with this matter many times over many years, but we might finally be on the cusp of actually getting something through. And the two major parties have often had different positions on this. Indeed, the Rann Labor government tried to ban corflutes under the leadership of the then Attorney-General Michael Atkinson, but that push tanked with opposition from the Liberal Party. Then, when the Liberals were in government, they tried to ban corflutes, and that effort tanked with the opposition of the Labor Party. And I should point out the Honourable John Darley, who originally, I think, at one point had pointed out that he was in favour of banning corflutes, and then performed a miraculous backflip and voted quite a different way for reasons that are still not clear to me. Or potentially the Honourable Mr Darley, some could say. But I am pleased that we've finally reached a point where we're going to actually deal with this matter. And I think what really has been the catalyst for this renewed push is a letter that I sent to the Premier on behalf of the Greens on Tuesday of this week, urging him to finally take action on this issue, recognising that we're heading into another by-election, yet another election, where the people of Dunstan were going to not only face another election in 2 years, but we're also going to face the spectre of more corflutes. And I said, look, we've got this by-election coming down the line, let's finally deal with this. And I recognise the fact that the opposition has a bill, why don't you dust it off and make it happen? Well, pressure works, Mr President. Pressure from the Greens works. And we welcome the fact that the government has taken this issue up, made it a priority, and we made it very clear that we were happy to cooperate with the government to get this done. And the Honourable Tammy Franks and I welcome the opportunity for this reform. The features of the bill have been identified by the Honourable Heidi Girolamo, so I won't go through all of those, but I might just briefly speak to some of the amendments that the Greens will be moving to save time in the committee stage. Back when the Honourable Vicky Chapman, then Attorney-General, proposed this reform in the last parliament, I had negotiated a number of amendments with her that we saw as being quite important safeguards against unintended consequences. Some of those amendments related to putting into the Act the provisions of the Public Assemblies Act to make it clear that members of the community could still carry signage and posters at public rallies and events. For instance, we often have protest actions, despite the Labor Party's best efforts to prevent them. We do still have protests happen on the steps of our parliament, and we want to make it clear that members of the community can still carry signs. So we're putting that into the bill. But we're also making it clear that candidates or indeed politicians can still have A-frames out in public space, and that signage would be permitted. Our amendments would also allow for the practice of wobble boarding, which I see from social media some members of this chamber are very keen on. So I expect them to support these sensible amendments. As I've seen on social media, they've been very active out wobble boarding in recent days. I'm sure they don't want to see that activity being prohibited. The other elements of the Green amendments speak to what constitutes an advertising poster. So under the previous Vicky Chapman bill, which I think the Honourable David Spears bill has been modelled on, the legislation was to prohibit the corflute material, which is in effect single-use plastics. But I think it was always the intention of the minister, at least my understanding, the intention of the minister at that time, was to prohibit election posters being on public space. It was about the single-use plastics, but it was also about the poster material. Well, the way that the legislation was written meant that people could circumvent that, and these provisions were applied to the Local Government Act. And so what we saw was some local government candidates using cardboard cutouts and cardboard posters to try and circumvent the rules. So this amendment tidies that up. Because whilst the Greens have a concern about the environmental impact of corflutes, our concern is also about the equity element and the arms race that this sets off. Because if you're a small player and you're wanting to compete in an election, you could be having to spend a fortune on getting these posters designed and getting them up and about. They cost about $7 a pop. So we wanted to close that loophole as well and stop what is in effect a pollution of our public space. We're also wanting to make it very clear that you can't hold a street corner meeting outside of a polling place on election day. One of the other elements that we've sought to deal with is this issue that comes through in the Act around posters being placed or signs being placed on behalf of candidates. We could foresee a scenario where maybe an overzealous volunteer is putting up posters, or a scenario perhaps where another party puts up posters that is masquerading as another political party's materials, and that could therefore take up the permissible number of posters for a party or candidate. We didn't think that was fair, so our amendment is to make it clear that the consent of the candidate is required in relation to that. And we note that where this occurs in relation to the Legislative Council candidates, the requirement of the lead candidate on the ticket, the candidate whose name appears at the top of the ballot paper, would be required. There's a number of amendments that flow through from that general principle, Mr. President, which are consequential. Another amendment we deal with is to increase the number of corflutes that a candidate can display on election day. Now, the previous proposal from the Liberal Party was 6. I think in the Greens we felt that that was maybe a little bit too restrictive on election day. You wanted to, if you had a situation where you had lots of polling entrance points, we wanted to make sure people could still get their message out. So we proposed to double it to 6. I've talked about, to 12 rather, thank you. I've spoken about, sorry, to double it from 6 to 12, just so we're clear. I have spoken a bit about the issue around consent. We also wanted to recognise this issue around authorisation of materials. So the current rules provide that a candidate would only be liable for an offence of placing additional corflutes where they gave consent for this to occur. That's certainly what we're proposing through our amendment. But we didn't want a situation where political parties could try and circumvent the offence provisions by maybe using a campaign manager or a surrogate to permit the placing of the corflutes. So we've added in a new provision that's under section 15 or amendment number 15. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it. But in effect, it's also making it offence for a party director or party manager to authorise those materials and have them displayed on their behalf. And to that, point, the bill as it currently stands makes the candidate or the lead candidate, in the case of a Legislative Council group, responsible for all corflutes that are distributed in their seat. Now, as I understand it, that's to ensure that there is someone who is ultimately responsible and that individual volunteers aren't being fined for following orders from Campaign HQ. I get that. But I don't believe that when we know that a candidate hasn't consented to the distribution of materials on their behalf, they would still be liable. And that's, I think, particularly true where another political party might be pulling out posters as some sort of tactic. I can't imagine why another political party would do such a thing, would masquerade as another political party, but sometimes these things happen. So it's an important loophole to close, Mr. President. In order to address that issue and ensure there's some accountability, the amendment would create a new offence applicable to the person who authorised the material. And so in most cases that would be the registered officer of a political party. Understanding the Greens, that's, well, for our party in the Greens, it's the state director. I think it's the same for the Liberal Party. But I understand that would be the state secretary of the Labor Party. So that would ensure that there's somebody who is ultimately responsible for the materials that are being put out by the political party, and that occurs under the bill as it currently stands. I note that there is a scenario that hasn't been addressed in the bill where unauthorised posters are being displayed, but we also recognise that that's already an offence under the Electoral Act. And the bill also gives the power to the returning officer or the presiding officer at the polling place, rather, to remove those materials. And we think that's important, so that if someone's doing the wrong thing, that material can be taken down. I suspect that in practical terms, when you're looking at the election day itself, the power to remove those materials would be very important. Nonetheless, I think the offence provisions included in the bill, which we are seeking to amend, are also really important in terms of trying to deter parties from intentionally breaking the rules and trying to gain political advantage. So we're trying to close that loophole. To that end, one of the other issues that we're proposing that we include is giving the Electoral Commissioner the power to issue a formal written warning to a person who commits an offence under the bill relating to too many corflutes on election day. Now, again, what we didn't want was a situation where you might have a really overzealous volunteer who turns up, who puts too many posters in the wrong spot. It's a genuine mistake. Under the wording of the Act as it currently stands, the lead candidate would face a significant fine, and it reads as if there's no opportunity to try and caution them and remedy the behaviour. Under what we're proposing is the Commissioner would be given the power to give the candidate a caution, say you need to take that down. Now, if they don't do so, they could issue the fine, or they could go straight to a fine in the case of a serious breach. But it's just giving a little bit more discretion to the Commissioner so that you're not seeing people being pinged if there's been a genuine mistake or a genuine error. Look, I think that's a good summary, Mr. President, of the amendments that the Greens are seeking to advance. I'll talk more about those in the committee stage, but that gives a good summary of the key general principles. I think it's fair to say we've approached this in terms of wanting to make sure there's some common sense protections for all people that participate in our political process, candidates, also members of the community more broadly. We are proposing that there be some powers given to the Attorney-General as well to make regulations as necessary. That's because there might be some things that, or some particular exemptions that are required that we haven't thought of. I know a scenario that's been mentioned to me is, what about if someone has a bumper sticker on the back of their car and they've got it parked on the side of the road? Could they be captured under the provisions? Doesn't seem that they should be, but that's not really clear. So we wanted to give the Minister the power to make some regulations for those sort of scenarios. It would be my hope that in crafting those regulations, that the Minister would look at what works in other jurisdictions in terms of coming up with some of those carve-outs. In crafting these amendments, I engaged with the opposition, or the then Liberal Party at the time under the leadership of Minister Chapman, to craft some of these amendments, but we've also engaged with the Attorney-General's office in relation to some of the other elements as well. I do want to apologise to members that the amendments were sent out very late last night. I'm genuinely very sorry about that. I would have liked to have given people more time to consider them, but we were waiting for some of them to come back from the drafters. I did, however, contact the Honourable Heidi Girolamo to give her a general overview of what some of the things were that we were seeking to address, and I do recognise that some of these won't be new to the Liberal Party, given they were dealt with during the last period of Parliament. But look, in closing, the Greens welcome this. We've been pushing this for a long time. I think the community will be breathing a sigh of relief if the Parliament finally does away with corflutes. Our political parties' candidates should be judged on the merit of their policies, and we should actually have a political system that puts a focus on that. I did say to a journalist, I was on the 5AA Matthew Pantelis program the other day talking about this, and I said politics isn't a beauty pageant. He said, "You've got that right." I wasn't sure what he was meaning by that, but really we should be, I think, judged on our policies, not simple slogans and the like. And I think this really brings South Australia into line with other jurisdictions. I think it's something that will be welcomed by most people in the community.